Welcome back! Thank you guys so much for joining us. You'll recall that we just left off in Building 101 where we learned to build trees and how to use our build tools. If you haven't watched that, highly recommend it. Links in the description, links right here. Awesome. Go check Building 101 out because today we're in Building 102. We're going to learn all about gizmos. We're going to build a respawn script. We're going to go through some really cool building tricks. Starting us off, you're going to notice that we have this kind of riverbed. Obviously, the trees are going to go around in here, and we've got this little like sandy shore. And then here we have this lake. And so if you look at this lake, we're seeing this kind of blue here, and what that is, that's an invisible wall. And I'll get into that in just a second. But what you'll see here is there's this lake layer, and you can actually fall through it, and then you have, this is the floor. So it's this deep blue is the floor, so you can stand on this one. This one's solid. This one's non-collidable. And down here, you'll also see I have put in a ramp. This is a non-collidable ramp, but it's just for looks if someone was to duck their head underneath the water. And then this ramp connects to this square, creating this kind of layered area. And then I've used the half cylinder twice to make rounded sand, as well as a rounded edge for the forest. I've also got this log that looks like it's kind of fallen across the river, and this is going to be the respawn zone. So people are going to respawn here, and what we're going to do is we're going to create logs that spawn in here, and they drift down to here, and the player's going to have to jump from each log to get across this river. And if they make it to the end, success. In our next video, we're actually going to make this have rounds, and so that's going to be more like getting to the other side. Stay tuned for Scripting 101 because it's going to be awesome. If you haven't already, make sure to hit the like button, hit subscribe, and if you turn the notification bell on, you'll know when we post a new video. Right here on the edge, what you're going to see is that we've got these invisible walls, and I've locked them in place so I don't accidentally touch them. So remember, the lock button is down here on the bottom right. Now, if I unlock this, I can now interact with it, move the invisible wall. You can see it's kind of got this outline. I'm going to go hit undo. And now if we open up the properties panel, I'm going to lock it back in place. You can see that visibility is turned off, and by default, light and shadow is turned off. If I turn light and shadow on, it's going to cast shadows. And so we don't want to do that. So you can see it just got instantly darker. That would be great if you're trying to build a dark room, but that's not what we're trying to do here. The next thing to note is that collidability is turned on. There is no motion. This is not animated. And if you look here on the edges, I've extended it just slightly so there wouldn't be any Z-ripping. And what that is when two layers are overlapping, they start to flicker, competing to be shown. And so this really only affects the build mode, but it can also affect the play mode. For instance, down here, you can see I've done the same thing by extending this out just slightly to prevent these from ripping. And I think this is a very important thing to note because some people can experience seizures from flashing, and this can create flashing really easily. And it's all due when you use your snap tool. And if I snapped this to right here, it would start flickering. Obviously, I'm not going to do it to demonstrate it. So if you are prone to seizures, I do not recommend using the snap tool when there's overlap. So just be very cautious with that. You can also see I've done it with the water element down here. As you might have guessed, this top blue layer is visible but non-collidable. And inversely, we have the bottom layer as both visible and collidable so that you could stand on it. Now in this top layer, we're going to put a trigger, and that trigger is going to do two things. Number one, it's going to respawn the player, and the player is going to respawn up here on this log where they can start again. And number two, it's going to play a splash visual effects. The last thing to note in our design is there's this invisible cube right here on top of the log. What this allows is when the player is up here, they have a clear platform they can stand on. It feels like I'm walking on the log, but if this wasn't here, I'd be falling off and you'd see my edge would be constantly curving like this, and eventually you'd just fall off. So it's much nicer to have this nice flat platform. You can walk up against the invisible wall here, and then when you're ready, you can jump off. Whee! Before we get into gizmos and basic scripting, I'd like to start us off with a few really cool tricks in terms of building and snap tools. For instance, Victor Riddle created this amazing crystal, and you might look at this and think, wow, how could you make that? And that's what a lot of people were asking. They were saying, how is it possible to make something like this? Here's the trick. We're going to pull out one of these hexagons. Now we're going to scale it up a little bit. I'm going to snap it in place so it's nice and level. The next thing we need is one of these pyramids. Now this pyramid is going to be key to success. With snapping on, we can look at our hexagon and see that there's this point here and this point here. If we utilize this point right here with a snap rotation of 15 degrees, we can easily snap it along this edge. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my pyramid here, snap it right there. We can't just drag and snap this to here, or can we? So there's no point right here on this edge, but there is on this edge. And so if we drag, we'll get a extension line, and it uses this as its marker. And now we have perfectly aligned this edge over here. And then we come to this blue stretch point, and we stretch that over to this edge. And now we have perfectly aligned this pyramid to be stretched and scaled to form 2 of the 6 sides of our crystal. The next thing we're going to do is, with snapping still turned on, we go to the duplicate tool, put our hand in this green top, and then drag, and you'll see it aligns when you're on 15 degrees. And then I'm going to joystick to the right to duplicate, and then I'm going to do that, and there you have it. We have the top of our crystal. Now, what I would recommend doing with your crystal is you might want to make it more pointy or less pointy. So if you click, then joystick to the right to scale up, we can quickly select all 3 of these, put our hand inside, joystick to the left to group them, and now if I turn snapping off, we can easily scale this up and down and get it to exactly where we want it to be. You could have it really soft like this, or you could have it really pointy like this. And that is how Victor Riddle has created crystals inside of Horizon. It's absolutely gorgeous. And so once you apply a color like this beautiful blue or this deeper purple, and it's just gorgeous. Huge props to Victor, and thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with the community. Next, we're going to look at arraying candles. So if you look at these candles, they're perfectly aligned on this cake. Absolutely gorgeous, right? So if we come down here, the way this works is you first start by putting a candle here on the left. You then put another one on the opposite side on the right. And then you select both and rotate them around. So let's go ahead and try this out. So we're going to start by grabbing a cylinder like this. We'll go ahead and scale it down to cake size, and I'm going to scale it up just so it's a little more easy to work with. And then we're going to grab one of these, and we're just going to call this our candle, and we'll scale that up. Now the next thing you're going to do is grab the snap point here on this side, find the snap point over here, and align it until it's green. We're then going to grab this snap point here and move it to over here on this snap point. Now with both of these selected, you might be thinking that's too close to the edge for candles. How do you get at this perfect distance from the edge? And the way we do that is we turn snapping off and we just slide this in. And you're like, well, how do you make it equal? Well, the way you do that is you drag through both of these, turn snapping back on, and when you're inside here, you're going to see a blue center dot here. Now we know the center point on this one is right around here. So once it's green, we have now equally distanced these. And with both of them selected, we then duplicate it and get it just to 1 notch. And then on your right hand, you can use the array tool to create the rest of the candles perfectly aligned and spaced. There we have it. That's how you create cake candles with perfect spacing. And there's a ton of other amazing uses for this. There's one other really cool trick I want to show you with arrays that we haven't talked about yet. So if we come to this cake and we grab on this top point here, now we've dragged this down. I'm going to turn the snapping off. I'm going to scale just slightly, then I'm going to turn snapping back on, align it here at the bottom of the cake, and then array, and it makes equally larger cake pieces. So now I've got this pretty much like a wedding cake here with these multiple tiers. I can go grab my colors from over here. So we'll go ahead and joystick to the left to select color. Now I can go and create a few different tiers of this cake. Grab that color for this one and that there. And look at that beautiful wedding cake. I mean, that's just gorgeous. It's got equal proportions. And so this might not look equal to you, and I totally get that. But what's happening here is, say this is scaled by 10 or 15%. Well, then this one is scaled by 10 or 15%. And then this one is scaled by 10 or 15%. And that's how they get so perfectly aligned. Now that you know how to make really awesome 3D art, let's make some flattened 3D art. You'll probably design a better cake topper than this, but that's okay. Now we're going to go ahead and select this entire cake. I start at the bottom because this is our square point, and then I'm going to go up through the rest. I enlarge my selection tool by joysticking to the right so I can quickly select all the small pieces. And now that I have this, I'm going to put my hand in and group it into a single grouping, then grab my duplicate tool and pull off a duplicate. Now that I have my cake, to flatten it, what you're going to want to do is go into your build menu and grab a square. Now the way you want this to look is the perspective that you line this square with. So if I put the square, say down here, for instance, and I point it up, this is the perspective it's going to take on. If I go from down here, it's going to have this perspective. So basically you're just circling around till you find the way you want your 3D object to look. And I want mine to look kind of opposite to our last cake. So I'm going to point it this way, get that just in line. And then we can take this and point it right here into the center. So now that I have centered alignment, it's going to be perfect. So first things first is I'm going to click, drag through the square first, so that takes on the perspective of this. Then I'm going to group it with our cake. So now I just group the two objects together. And now I can scale this and gain that perspective of the square. You can see it's now flattened like a 3D object. Be careful how far you flatten this, because remember how we were talking about Z-ripping? That can easily happen when you're flattening 3D objects. So right about there is perfect for me. I'm going to open up the properties, then go back inside of the object and pull this object out and just delete it. You can see it gets this really interesting perspective as you rotate it. Look at that. Very unique, right? So now if I grab it and pull down, I can delete it. And then I'm going to exit the grouping by pressing on this triangle. So if you didn't catch that, we can zoom into a grouping by pressing on this arrow in. It's called zoom in, and then you can exit by doing zoom out. Now that we have this all selected, we're going to exit out of this. I'm going to scale it down to the size that matches my other cake. And now we have two awesome flattened cakes. To access your snap settings, you're going to open your build menu, go to the settings icon, and over here you're going to see snap to point or objects, and I've done both. My grid units is currently set to 0.1 meters, so that's 1/10 of a meter. And then our object rotation, I currently have it set to snap to angle with 15 degrees. Now these are what I recommend. You can easily change your grid size to be more refined or greater. You can also change your snapping size if you want it to be like 90 degrees. And once you have this all set up correctly and to your liking, now when we come in here, I can grab from this snap point and quickly snap over here. Or if I want to, I can grab from this stretch point and snap up to here. You can see this green line appears to show that I've aligned it to this point. I can even align to points that are further away. They don't have to be touching. For instance, if we go ahead and duplicate this object over to here, and then I stretch from here down to here, I've now got like a doorway in a building. And there's so many great uses for this. Like, we're really just scratching the surface. As you continue to use these tools, it's going to become easier and easier. And the biggest thing I can recommend is don't forget about your center snap points, the center of the object snap point. These can create some really unique effects, especially if you pull them together. And now we've got this like really unique stepping stair effect, especially if we use our array tool to make this kind of like stairway up. Text objects can be used to create remarkable patterns. They can also be used to create like stretch lines in windows or windowsill edges, although I believe Merc has actually used a physical square object, so you can actually see this is a square, and it's using a unlit blue. And by using unlit blue, it doesn't put off any light, but the edges blend together, which gives it this beautiful look. And so just to kind of demonstrate that really quickly, if we go to your build menu, grab a square out, and then you grab a circle out, you see how this has this edge here? If we go over to our paint tab, select unlit, and we grab just pretty much any color, we'll go with this vibrant yellow, you can still see the edge, but the moment we put this together, they blend the edges. And so as you can see, when you take this and you snap this together to create like a windowsill, now the edges blend together and it doesn't look like two objects, it looks like just a pane of glass. And you might be wondering, how do you create these slashes so it looks like a windowsill reflecting light? Well, this is a period, this is a dash, and this is an underscore. And all you do is use this break symbol to break it into 3 separate lines. So you can see underscore, break line, dash, break line, period, and then stretch out that text object, and you get this really gorgeous look. Even here above the window, these brackets just look like a really gorgeous pattern and only require one text object. And looking beyond the window, you can see this really gorgeous landscape that Merc has created. And by doing this, he's used perspective to make it look like it was further away, despite it being really right here. But because it's scaled down and just, it looks like, oh wow, you're looking across a really nice landscape. Inside of our landscape, you'll also notice that there's multiple objects, but because we're using unlit blue, the edges blend together. So we get this kind of really beautiful skybox. And because we're in this unlit blue cube, we need lights. We have these invisible light beams here. And if I stretch it out, you'll be able to see that it's putting off a lot of light, even though it's just really tiny. That's what's lighting this scene up and making it look so gorgeous and not just dark. And you can see that visibility is turned off. While light and shadow is off by default, it has to be turned back on, and collisions have to be turned off so you don't accidentally walk into this depending on where you're using these invisible glowing objects. And even when you're creating character faces, you can see these are periods, and this is a parentheses, and you've got this kind of like double chin made with a parentheses and a minus symbol. It's really clever, but it creates this awesome look, and you can see that character design doesn't have to be perfect. Making it look a little bit cartoonish is great for making great looking characters. I just want to give a huge thank you to Merc, who came in to share these amazing tips and tricks he uses in his awesome worlds. So thank you so much. Gizmos. Oh my gosh, I love gizmos. If you haven't already touched them, they are extremely powerful, and we are just scratching the surface. So first, we're going to start with our environment block. The environment gizmo is going to give you access to setting the daytime, whether you want it to be sunrise or any of these various settings. For now, we're going to go ahead and stick with daytime. We can also change the fog density. So right now we're at 0.01. You can go up to 0.10 where things get really foggy, or in this case, we're going to go with 0.00, so it's a beautiful clear sky day. The grid can be turned off or on, so we can turn off the grid, or we can turn it back on. So some people have actually used the grid to create textured floor in their worlds, and so there is some use for it, although most of the time I recommend turning the grid off. We're going to leave it on because it kind of helps with our aesthetic. And then VOIP settings. This allows you to define how your players hear and interact with each other, whether it's default, which is similar to what you hear in the plaza, global, which would mean everyone can hear each other with just really slight direction heard, and then nearby, meaning you have to be really close to people to hear them, or extended, where you can hear people who are far away but it's not as loud as global. And for our world, we're going to go ahead and use extended because it's going to be a relatively small world, so I think that's going to work best. And then we have text, which can be so very powerful. That's how we saw some of the art that Merc had created. We can turn visibility off on the text, so if you want to hide the text and then turn it on at some point, that's an option, and we'll get into that. That would be a scripted behavior. And then in here we can type hello world or any other variation of text you might want to share, like welcome to my world. And then once you have your text, you can scale it to get it to the right size. You can also paint it. So if you go into your style tab and select a color for your text, you can paint it any color. And there's so many more settings that come along with text. I'll link a video to get you started learning more about text and how to use it. The big one that I recommend you learn is break. That's the less than symbol, BR, greater than symbol. And that allows you to create two lines. So you could say, hello world player, and now you've got hello world player. It's kind of funny, but really, really cool, powerful stuff. Lots you can do here. You can also use like the brackets to create italics and bold, as well as underline, and that's just the B, I, and U symbols. And there you can see we've got really cool looking text now. And then we have particle effects. If we go to particle effects, we can turn the looping on, and now we've got this looping smoke coming off. And we can change it from being the default, which is smoke poof, to like hit spark or confetti bursts, which is a lot of fun. And so many more amazing options, like magic buildup, which is really cool, and vertical lines, which look great on waterfalls. The thing that you need to know is you can adjust these effects by clicking on the object. Once it's selected, you'll be able to scale it. And so you could scale these vertical lines to make them look like they're waterfall. So this is obviously going the wrong direction for it to be a waterfall, but it's a really cool effect that you can do just by flipping it over like that. And now you can imagine this would look like a waterfall if it was on a blue backdrop. The last preset to note is we have fireworks, and they are really cool. Look at that effect, but unfortunately we cannot change the color. I suspect color changing is coming in the future, but probably won't see that for a while. So if you're looking for it or you're trying to paint it, sorry, but that's not an option just yet. As a quick reminder, gizmos can be found on the second tab of your build menu, and so you'll see there's all of these different gizmos that we're talking about right now. Now on to TrailFX. TrailFX allow you to create paths and patterns. So right now the length is only 1/3 of a meter. So if we go and change this to say 5, and I don't think this is actually length, maybe this is time, it's kind of hard to tell. And then we've got width, so we can change the width of this, which will also make like 1. Which is really thick, by the way. It's like really thick. So it starts as 111 as a color, so that's white, and then it ends a little bit darker, like a darker blue tone. So if we go ahead and grab this and drag it around. So worth noting, if you want to preview the TrailFX, you have to scroll down and you're going to see preview. So you can click and drag to scroll, and then you can turn it on by hitting play. And now if we go and grab this TrailFX, you can see we can drag this effect around. And this is awesome, but you're like, how can I really use this? It's not like players can interact with this effect, can they? Well, you might remember we've worked with a little bit of grouping. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and change this width down to 0.1 because that was just way too thick. I'm also wanting to play with the colors. So let's go ahead and make this 0.5, 0.5, and 0.5. I just want it to be more gray tone, and we can check that out. And so here you can see it kind of fades to gray as it goes out. And then I'm also going to adjust the preset. Default keeps it square, but I'm going to go with a tapered trail because I love the way that fades on the end, and it just goes really nicely with our gray tone. I've grabbed a duplicate copy and I've shrunk it down, and now I'm going to go to my Shapes tab and grab this ball. And now I'm going to take this ball, grab the center point, and align it to the center point of this. I then drag through both of them, so make sure they're both selected, and then group them together by joysticking to the left, open up the Properties panel, and you're going to see that we have motion, animation, and interactive. If you want to use animation, this is a great time to use animation. So we could simply hit record, drag this around, make a little figure 8 like this, and then go ahead and slow down, and then click stop. And then you could say loop, back and forth, play on start, change the speed to maybe be like 0.5. And now we've got this really cool effect where we now have this infinity loop. So here we can see that it's turning around and going the opposite direction. And this is just the beginning of how you can use TrailFX to create some really, really cool art. Before we move on from animation, I want to quickly mention that looping continuously can create a jump cut. So I recommend using back and forth. But what if we don't want it to be animated? What if we make this ball interactive and we give it some physics and make it so you can grab it? And we go in here, maybe we turn this from default to rubber ball perhaps. And now we come in here and we've got this ball that kind of bounces. And so now I can grab the ball and it's bouncing. It's creating kind of this really cool graph. I can throw it up in the air. We can see the arc that it's making. And now you've got the basis for a really awesome ball game where you could be throwing a ball with your friends and being able to watch the trail it makes, which is honestly so much cooler than just throwing a ball. Next, we have the sound recorder. This allows you to record your voice or record a sound effect that you want to record. You can even make sounds like la 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 la. And then when we play it back, la 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 la. And we can adjust the volume of it, make it less loud. We can also adjust the pitch to make it really funny or sound deeper or high pitched. And then the distance, if you scroll down to the bottom, there's this distance, and for some reason it's set as a default of 1000, which basically makes it global. So the point of this is kind of uncertain. But if you want it to be global, hit this button to make it global. If you don't want it to be global, I recommend like 10, because sometimes you just want this to be heard within 10 meters of the person, not everybody in your world, and most worlds are way less than 1,000 meters. So like I said, I don't fully understand why that's the default. As you can see, there's a lot you can do here to make some really fun noises. And if you go ahead and hit loop and play on start, it's going to constantly make this noise. So you don't even have to add scripting. But if you want it to just play one time, we'll get into scripting and I'll show you exactly how we can do that really easily. Last, but certainly not least, we have doors. Doors are portals to other worlds. So if you have a world that you've created or one of your collaborators has a world they've created, they can drop a door, or you can drop a door by clicking on this door gizmo, click change world, and then you can pick from any of your published worlds. And so if I click on World Tours Hub, it's going to bring up the World Tours image. And now as a player, I can hit visit world to go to the World Tours Hub. Are you ready to write your first script? Oh, if not, don't worry. This is so simple. We bring out the script block, and from our script menu, we can start by renaming this. I'm going to go ahead and rename mine Respawn with Splash. So what are we going to do? Well, we're not going to be using when world is started. So that's the default thing that starts in your world. So we click on this and hold, and then pull down to delete. Now, if we go to our events tab, that's the first one on the left, we can scroll down and get when trigger is entered by player. That's underneath player events. So when trigger is entered by player, that describes what is going to happen. When this trigger is entered by a player, what we're going to do is respawn them on this respawn point. So now if we go to the motion tab, that's the second tab, scroll down to respawn player, and then we're going to grab this player ID value. That means this is the player that entered that trigger. And we want to respawn that player, not to self. So if you click on self, pull down to delete that, we need a spawn point. So how do we connect a spawn point? And it's Very important that we note how scripting works, because this script block is not where the script is running. The script has to run on an object. So in this case, this trigger is the object we're going to be running on. So if I open up this trigger properties panel, you can see that it's enabled, which means you can walk into it and it'll fire an event. We trigger on players. You can also do objects, but we'll get into that in our 101 class. So then trigger on players, objects tagged not relevant because we're not doing objects tagged, we're only doing players. And down here, you see where it says attached script. Well, we click on this drop-down menu and we can see respawn with splash. Now that this script is attached, this object is what's running the script. Very important to note that, because when the trigger is entered by a player, we only get this event because the script is running on a trigger that can be entered by a player. And so when a player enters this space, this green space here, we will then respawn the player to this spawn point. But how do we tell the script to go to this spawn point in particular? Well, the way we do that is by going to the variables tab. That's the far right tab. And you'll see you can create a new variable, and the name of this variable is going to be called spawn point. And then the type of this variable is not a number, but it's actually an object. And an object is anything you can interact with, see or hear. That is an object. This is not a list, and we're not going to touch lists for a while, but a list is simply an array or a long list of objects, numbers, or any of these other variable types. Again, we'll get into that in the 101 scripting class. Today, we just want to connect an object. So now that we've selected object, we've named it, we click confirm, you can see we now have access to this spawn point object, which we can then drag over to spawn point. So now when the trigger is entered by a player, it's going to respawn the player on the spawn point. But we need to reference this spawn point to this variable because they're not connected yet. So to connect it, we come down here to our script and you're going to see spawn point is empty. So there's a space for us to fill out what spawn point is. Now you don't have to type. The way it works is you come down here to this reference pill that says spawn point on it. And if you want to name this, we can actually come up here and rename it and call it point your raycast at the world spawn. Now you can see it's selected. Now if I drag it over here and point it at empty, it gets highlighted. And when I let go, it says the spawn point is now world spawn. And I know that I've labeled this world spawn, therefore they're connected. And the wire is just a great visual indicator to know which spawn point is connected. So now that we know this trigger is connected to this spawn point, let's go ahead and test it out. So if I press up on my joystick, I spawn in on the world spawn point, and I know directly to my right is the spawn. So if I walk this way, I just got respawned, just like that. So we know the script is working, but the next thing we want to do is we want to create a splash visual effect, because when the player falls into the water, we not only want to respawn them, but we also want to have visual effect to indicate that. So if we come over here to our visual effect and we open this one up, we wanted to go ahead and turn play on start off. We're not going to have this looping, and then we're going to change the preset from fireworks to, let's see, water burst. Perfect. Oh, that's so great. And now we can press play to preview the visual effect. This is a little bit large, so I'd come down to my player here and then I'd align my visual effect so I can kind of get an idea of how big it's going to be. And now I think that scale is just perfect. Let's go ahead and leave that properties panel open. And now if we come back to our script, inside of our script, we go to the variables tab. And we need to create one more variable, and it's also an object variable, but this time it's going to be called water VFX. So we know exactly what it is. We can click confirm. And now we used motion, but now we're going to go to actions. And so under actions, this is where we have the ability to play animations. We have the ability to play sounds. We also have the ability to play visual effects. So we're going to grab the play visual effects and we're going to drop it right here. But there's a problem with this. The visual effect is not where the player is at. So we actually need to move the visual effect to the location of the player. And it's also not self, because remember, this script is running on the trigger, so self is defined as the trigger. So we want to go ahead and delete self, and we want to come back to our variables tab, grab the water visual effects. Now we've got the correct visual effects playing, but we need to move that visual effect. So let's go to the motion tab, scroll to the top, grab instant motion, move to. We put that right above the visual effects symbol here. And what are we moving? Well, we're not moving the self. What we're moving is this water visual effects. We're going to go ahead and grab that. And then by holding it over the object tab and pressing joystick to the right, I can duplicate it. Or you can also come back to the variables tab to grab another copy. Now moving to 100, not where we want to go. So this is a vector input. 100 defines it as basically the 000 of the world. And so the position we want to go to is the position of the player. Now we can't just drag that in. That would be really cool. Honestly, that would be so cool, but no, to use this correctly, we have to go to the Operators tab. And on the Operators tab, we scroll down and eventually you're gonna see Player. There it is. So once you find Player, the top one is called Position of Player. With using Position of Player, we now can get the head or foot position of the player. In this case, I think I'm going to use the torso of the player. And then we drag the player ID down to where it says player here. So now we're moving that water visual effect to the torso of the player, and then we play the splash on the player. Super cool. Coming back to our trigger, if we open up the properties panel, you can see that there's a little bit of a bug here where we can't see the water visual effect. To fix this bug, you simply close the trigger, reopen it, and you're going to see that the new visual effects slot is there and it's empty. So we still need to go over to our prototype particle effects and let's give this a real name like splash. There we go. Perfect. So now we've got splash. We're going to grab that and put that right here under water visual effects. And let's go ahead and try it out. So if I go up on my player, I've respawned in. I know this is the spawn point. So if I walk into it and then immediately look to the right, we kind of saw it. If you're the only player online and you really need to test this, go ahead and delete respawn, go in as a player. So now when I walk into the trigger, I can see the visual effect went off. And I can do that a few times. I can even use my hand and you can see it's coming out of my torso. So that's quite interesting. Now, if I come back in here, all I need to do is hit the undo button and it'll put my script back in. So make sure you hit undo so you don't lose the teleporting portion of this. But now that we know the water visual effect is going off, there's one other thing we really need for this to be super immersive. We need sound effect. So let's go ahead to our variables tab and grab a new variable. This will also be an object, and this one is going to be called Splash Sound FX. Perfect. Click confirm, and then we go back to our actions tab, and we're going to scroll up a little bit, play sound. Now the same thing is true with the sound. It's not self, so we need to go back to our variables tab, grab the splash sound effects, but it's also not in the right position. So we're gonna go ahead and grab this whole move event, and all we need to do is use joystick to the right to duplicate right above the play sound. But we're not moving the water visual effects again. We're going to grab that splash sound effect and then just joystick to the right into the object slot. It took me a couple times because it was finicky. So remember, you can always come back to the variables tab and just grab another copy like this as well. And we're also going to move that sound effect to the torso of the player. So that kept all of our code in there, which is super nice. So now we have this set up, we need a splash sound effect. So where do we get our sounds from? Well, if you open up your menu, click on sounds and then effects, we can search for, look at all these different splash sounds. This is awesome. So we'll go ahead and, perfect. Oh, that's it right there. Okay, boom. We've got our sound effect. When we open the properties, you're going to note that play on start is on, so we're going to turn that off. The volume's not bad. The pitch is pretty good, but the distance is of 100. That's bad. So we're going to go ahead and change this to be 20, so it's not super loud. You can still hear it at 20 meters, but it'll be softer, and if you're really close, it'll be louder. So that is awesome. Now what we're going to do is grab this jump water splash large, and since I think this is a really great description of this sound, I'm not even going to rename it, but now I can drop it in right there, and we've got it connected, referenced in, and if we come in as a player, and we go right into this, there it is. That was awesome. Super duper cool. So now how do we use this trigger in such a way that it allows our world to work? Grabbing this trigger, we can now align it to the world we made earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and grab on this middle point here. This is going to prevent that Z-ripping, the clipping I was telling you about. And so it's a little bit wider, and then we're going to stretch this all the way over to the other side. And then boom, there we go. So we've got this set up. Now it's a little too tall because the player is going to hit it before they get into the water, and that's not what I want to happen. So I'm going to go make it half the height of our non-collidable water layer. Now that I have this set up, I can go ahead in here and grab this edge and slide this all the way across our entire water feature. And so now if you fall into the water, you're going to get respawned and the effect's going to go off. But where do I want people to get respawned? On top of this log. So if we come down here and grab our player icon, we can move the spawn point to right here on the log. So when you get respawned, like when you join the world for the first time, this is where you spawn. And then if you fall off, no, and you just get respawned back up here. That is awesome. And that's the core game mechanic. And I want to move these sound effects and visual effects into a place that I won't accidentally delete them. So I'm going to go ahead and close out of their properties panels. but I'm going to select these two, and because they're related to the player, I'm going to move them on top of this player spawn and icon. Similarly, I want to grab our respawn with splash script and move that over here as well, so that way we keep it all kind of centrally located, easy to find if we need to make any adjustments. We'll also want to grab our environment block. I like to put this above my world so it's in a nice clean space so I can easily access it. It's kind of like the sun in the clouds, so I imagine it always being above in the sky, so that's a good spot for it. And then if we come down here, we don't need this, so I'm going to pull down delete. We don't need our TrailFX, so we're going to delete that one. But our world door, this is awesome. I would definitely recommend having doors to your other worlds. And so I'm going to go ahead and leave the World Tours hub door here. And this one down here, I've made the mansion, which is an awesome world that Merc and I have worked together with a few other people on. And if we come here, I can align it. So remember how I talked about aligning working from so far away? I have now aligned these so they're both centered on the log, just in the right spot. And we're going to welcome the player. And I don't think we're going to use blue because that'll blend right in. But let's grab the color of this log because I think that's a great color for this world. So we're going to use this kind of log color. We're going to make it bigger. Welcome to Logger! Exclamation point. And now I've got this really awesome line. I think I'd like to change it to have 2 lines though. So I'm going to go select inside of here and then backspace and then put a break in. So that'll break it up into 2 lines. Welcome to Logger! And then we'll capitalize the T to make it look a little bit more booyah. So now if we come in here as a player, welcome to Logger! Look at that, that's awesome. And then you'll see all these logs out here. So we need to go make a few logs and we're well on our way. Having just gone in and duplicated to create a little bit of a forest, it's not bad, but it's a little bit wonky because they're kind of like patterns. I'm just slightly adjusting these because I just wanted to get a bunch out there because I knew I could come in and quickly make my own adjustments so that they don't look so uniform. Sweet, this looks so good. And because it's so easy for players to get glitched off the world, we're going to go ahead and duplicate this trigger and we're going to stretch it so it's bigger than our world. It's right below the world. And then we're going to go ahead and grab this and slide this over. So that way it fills up this entire area just in case someone falls through the world. Sometimes it's like bad internet connection or whatever it is. We just want to make sure our players do not get stuck down here on the grid or floating in outer space and they have to restart. You might be thinking, but doesn't this respawn trigger like play splash and water effects? And is that really ideal? And you're right, that's not ideal. I'm going to leave it because I think it's funny. But if you didn't want to, all you have to do is hit this X to unlink the splash and hit this X to unlink the water. And then it wouldn't do that. It would just simply respawn them back to the world start. Or you could rewrite a script that just has the respawn in it. In preparing to build for this animation, I've created 4 different log sizes, and I plan to make more. But what I want to point out here is that we're going to be using recorded animation in this version to create the game. And to simply do that, all you're going to do is open your menu, and here you're going to be able to see that we've selected animated. You want to turn off your snapping, then you go ahead and hit record. Scale yourself bigger so you can get a smooth recording. Then you're going to select the green slider, slide this along as smoothly as you can. Once it's past the area, go ahead and hit stop. And now that we have stopped the recording, we can go and see that we want to set this to be continuous. Continuous means when it gets to the end past there, it's going to teleport back over here and then start up again. So that's perfect. I've also set the speed to be 0.06, so it's really nice and slow, so it's easy to jump onto. Play on start is on, so we can now hit play. And you can see this is moving at a really good speed. And then we just got to keep doing that manually. Now, I'm not going to do that for this entire video. If you went to the mansion in some of the earlier versions, we had a game like this where the logs were moving back and forth and you could jump across them to get to the other side. It was a really cool, simple thing, but it required a lot of recorded animation just like this. So if you want to do yours with recorded animation, by all means, please go ahead and try it out. It's awesome. Recorded animation is super duper powerful, but there are some glitches with it and some things we can't do, like making sure that they don't bump into each other. In our next video, we're really going to wrap this up and make this amazing. If you have any special requests, please be sure to leave them in the comments. And again, don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell if you'd like to hear about our latest videos. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Here we go. Woo! That is so fun. It's just so simple, but so satisfying. Bye. Bye.